The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Once I know I'm in the presence of a good storyteller, I'm not trying to do their work for them. I'm not trying to suspend my disbelief, but I just kind of let go and realize I can let go and enjoy the story.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Amy Beckley writes essays and short memoirs for the Cultivating Project and on her own blog, A Homeward Life. She's also the co-director of the Arts Guild of the Anselm Society. I caught up with Amy to talk about the discipline of noticing small splendors, the way that art reminds the recipient that they mean something to someone, and the way that time and distance unpack our memories to show us meaning that was there all along. Amy Beckley, I'm so glad that you made time to be on the Habit Podcast today.
Thank you. It's a real joy for me to be here.
The catalyst for me, finally getting in touch is I love your article in Cultivating Magazine so much. That's called "A Child in a Fine China Shop."
Oh, wow.
Just want to talk to you about that and some other things. One thing you talk about in that article is how much Beatrix Potter meant to you.
Yes.
Tell me about that. What about Beatrix Potter was important to you and is important to you?
Sure. I think it was the experience of actually encountering her books and where I got to encounter them, which was the back of a fine china outlet while I was running errands with my mother. But as far as I can recall, this was a repeated visit sort of thing. So in the back of this particular china shop, they had 12 of the Beatrix Potter books, and I would get to sit there while my mother browsed through the store. And I think it was really the illustrations that drew me in, and the context in which I found them, because you had to pass between all these. Well, it was a pretty spacious shop, actually, but you had to pass by all of these delicate figurines and depictions of, I think it was like puppies and dancing couples and English roses to get there. And so just sitting there and having the opportunity to read those books there, I think it just gave me an idea of a sanctuary of beauty and a place where I could sit in quiet in a pretty dim room and just enjoy these works for what they were. So I didn't know a lot about Beatrix Potter at the time. I just knew that there were these nifty little books that fit in my hands that I could just sit there and read, and nobody seemed to actually mind me being there either.
Yeah.
So, that was my first exposure to her. And
were you attentive to nature and natural beauty when you were little? I mean,
I think so. It's hard not to be, because I grew up in Blacksburg, Virginia, and Boone, North Carolina up until that point in my life. And so the Blue Ridge Parkway, being outside, my family would go for a lot of walks. And so, there was a lot of nature to be enjoyed there.
I was just asking because, of course, for Beatrix Potter, she was so attentive to the natural world.
Yes.
And I was wondering if reading her, is this a little girl seeing a kindred spirit? Or
I think so. And the fact that she depicted it in watercolor, and I still don't really know what it is that really draws me technically, I guess, to her paintings, but the colors that she chose and the delicateness of it all, I think that gave me an opportunity to maybe look at the things around me in a different way too. So I was just kind of captivated by how cohesive that was too, because it wasn't just one book, it was 12 of them. Yeah. And she had numerous characters, but they all were kind of portrayed in the same delightful way.
Yeah. Well, I don't know why I, for some reason, associate Beatrix Potter with China. Maybe it's the colors in those, China, the porcelain product.
Right.
But maybe it's the colors of those pictures. But I've always somehow associated Beatrix Potter with China, or maybe were there some Beatrix Potter plates that I would have seen when I was little. Have you ever seen those?
I have recently, like in the last 10 years or so. I don't know if something went public domain, but I feel like I've seen just chains and lines of Peter Rabbit everywhere.
Yeah, right.
So maybe, yeah.
Well, and I love the way you talk about China in this story. That the idea of your mother entrusting. So you tell the story of a little grade school classroom tea party that captured your imagination when you were little. And I love the way you talk about the trust and the hospitality and the I'm not sure, maybe you can fill in the other abstract nouns that your mother demonstrated in letting these little juveniles handle her china.
Yeah. I think the event itself was a surprise for all of us. And I could be wrong. I think I heard it referred to as the first annual tea party. So as far as I can recall, it was the first time that this teacher had done this with her class. And I didn't know, having walked through that fine china shop before and, gawked at all of these teacups, I didn't know, I don't think, that my mother had bought these teacups. And so they showed up at this party, and then they also became a part of my childhood over time. And it's still kind of a wonder to me that, she was very free with, letting me pull it out for special occasions or when I was sick, or my brother and I, although I think my brother liked drinking out of the Pyrex measuring cup more. She was just very good at that. She was very good at helping us to feel like there was something special and granting us permission to use the special things. Yeah.
Well, just even that idea of these kids that you knew every day, that you stood in line for the water fountain with, and that sort of thing, and now y'all come into this room and everything's transformed by ritual, so to speak.
Yeah. Yes, there was definitely.
And you see each other different from in this little moment of formality.
Because I don't think we had ever seen each other in a more formal setting up until that point. And just having that atmosphere transformed, it makes you look at people in a different way. And that's not something that I would ever have known to put into words, but I got to experience it.
Yeah.
That was pretty amazing.
Yeah. I've been listening to this podcast called Lord of Spirits. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but it's these Eastern Orthodox priests who talk about, the seen and the unseen world. One of their things is they don't like to talk about the natural and supernatural. They're like, it's all the world, and some of it we can see, some we can't. And they say that there are really 4 ways that we interact with reality, and especially unseen reality. And that's language, which is very important to you and to me, and art and music and ritual. And while their particular take on ritual, I'm not quite, as a Protestant, I'm not quite ready for yet. But then I think about the ritual involved in your little story of the children who were dignified and ennobled by the fact that these grown-ups sat them down and said, now we're going to mind our manners. And you can hold this little cup that's going to break if you drop it. Something about that feels like, to paraphrase, C.S. Lewis, the idea that, putting on your tuxedo or your ball gown is not a matter of showing off. It's almost a matter of disappearing into this larger thing than you are, which seems relevant to what you were talking about in your piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I don't think anybody had to take us aside and explain, now we are shifting into an event that is different from your normal school classes, but there was something inherent about the setting and even just the feel of the teacup that's going to be different from, like a school cafeteria cup or a mug that you use at home, that made us a little bit more aware that we were part of the fabric of something different at that point. Yeah.
Okay, so this is a podcast about writing, as you know, or about the creative process. Any of that shape the way you think about creativity, about writing, about the work that you do as a writer?
The relationship between seen and unseen?
Well, maybe, or the hospitality that's involved in all this. And you have a lot of interesting, when you talk about hospitality, about the way we welcome other people in. I mean, do you have some specific things to say on that subject? Okay. Well, maybe this, you can tell me how relevant this is to that part of the conversation. But you talk about this idea, a husband, I'm going to read if you don't mind. A husband picks wild asters on his way home from work for his sleep-deprived wife. A teacher and a group of parents conspire to host a special event at school. An artist writes a charming story of a little rabbit, an irate gardener to a sick child. Such gifts can leave an impact far surpassing the guess of the giver. They bide their time until they are called to mind in times of isolation and difficulty and utter poverty of spirit. Consider this, they quietly suggest. Why would anyone go to such trouble? Can it be that you mean something to someone? And I love that way of thinking about the work of a writer as honoring the reader and saying, I'm going to this trouble, because it is trouble, right? To write. I'm going to this trouble because you mean something, dear reader, and you're worth this trouble.
I love that. I was thinking of, I think, all of that more in the context of beauty and the things that we do because we love people, and how beauty almost organically becomes involved in anything that we do to provide for another person. But now that you said that, something I've been thinking about lately is Anthony Doerr and how he talks about providing the right detail in the right places, I think is how he puts it in Four Seasons in Rome. And I love that because I see him doing it so well. Like, one of the things that I love about his writing is that the pacing to me is just right. And he will give you an image to linger on, and it will linger, for a few sentences, and then he'll give you something else. And I think the way that he puts it is that a writer is manufacturing a dream of sorts for the reader. And so it's not, something that you're doing to process your own thoughts. Like, there's journal writing for that, he says. But when you are manufacturing this dream for a reader, you are trying to provide images and a setting and an atmosphere that are as cohesive and vibrant and clear as you can make them. And then when you go back over your draft and you're seeing how it all ties together, I think the way that he puts it is he goes back over his drafts and then he tests each sentence to see if there's a fracture in the dream. So he's like testing the seams of this thing. And I love that image because I think that is what the writers I love do so well for the reader. They provide this world, or they provide this voice or tone that you can kind of become immersed in. And if they do it really well, like in the hands of a really good filmmaker or a musician or a writer, I feel like there's a release that happens in the first couple minutes where once I know I'm in the presence of a good storyteller, I'm not trying to do their work for them. I'm not trying to suspend my disbelief, but I just kind of let go and realize I can let go and enjoy the story. I don't know if that all makes sense, but
no, it absolutely. Yeah. And that we talk about the willing suspension of disbelief, but that's really you only willingly suspend your disbelief at the beginning, and then you do it. I mean, it's not that you do it unwillingly; you do it without thinking about it one way or another until something breaks in.
Right. Yeah. So this idea of spending that on the part of spending that kind of time and craft on the part of the writer for the reader. Yeah, I guess that is what happens. Then the reader is able to return to it and say, this is a place where I encountered something, hopefully, and, this means something to me. Hopefully that in the grand scheme of things, I, as a writer, would love for the reader to know this all kind of cumulatively, hopefully helps you realize that you mean something to the ultimate someone. Yeah. And that, and all of these things that are brought to your notice, whether it's something natural that happens outside or something that happens within literature, these are things that are being dropped into your view to help you encounter and to know that you are loved.
Yeah. And that the at some point in that essay, you talk about prodigality, just this almost irresponsible, right? There's something irresponsible about putting bone china in a little juvenile's hand.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Just
that's not the responsible thing to do.
Yeah, right. And even I love that Beatrix Potter's Peter Rabbit story started with her just writing it in one little letter to a child. Yeah. And I think she talks about that yes, she did it for him, but she also did it for her own pleasure. Like this was a drawing that she wanted to make and a story that she wanted to make. And then all kind of combined together to create this thing that has now, blessed or, been a joy for children through generations.
Yeah.
But it's cool that happened.
And so in writing, on the one hand, we do shoot for efficiency, right? We don't, and one thing that can break the continuous dream that you mentioned earlier is too much extra words or ideas that don't feel like they belong. And yet it's also our job to be prodigal and inefficient, right? I mean, that's the dilemma of the writer. I've got to be efficient about the right things and prodigal about some other things.
Yes. And I don't know, I feel like I'm constantly learning the balance between those two. Mm-hmm. And so it's usually when I encounter a piece of writing that somebody else has done where they go off on something that I would never go off on, like the description of a scene or the story about a pet or something like that. I just I think sometimes because they catch me so off guard, those are the ones that I end up falling more deeply in love with because I'm just so impressed that somebody had the courage to do that. And then it gives me courage to, try something else out in a different direction.
Yeah. I hear you. And then sometimes I get self-indulgent, right?
Same here. Yeah.
I want to bring your attention to here's that passage I was talking about. What I saw in my mother and Beatrix Potter was a willingness to love prodigally, to place bone china in the hands of elementary school students, to squander detailed line drawings on a letter that a single child would receive. That's what you said, Amy. Since then, I've witnessed gardeners who have plucked their flower beds clean in order to give a bouquet away. I've met hostesses who have intentionally dropped plates in their kitchens to set clumsy guests at ease. Mm-hmm. And you compare that to the breaking of the alabaster flask of nard, which Judas was not too excited about.
Right.
But Jesus said,
Yeah.
This is the way
I love that he said that. I'm so grateful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The offerings of creative work, they're not necessary, except that they are. But I mean, the whole spirit of it is, here's this thing that's extraneous. I know you don't. I know that you can. This isn't going to help you make a living necessarily, but it might help you make a life.
Mm-hmm.
And,
I love that.
And that invitation. I love the way you talk about, beauty and creativity in those terms. And of course, nature is also highly inefficient.
Yeah.
so many. I mean, how many acorns does an oak tree make? That don't turn into oak trees. Like almost all of them don't turn into oak trees.
Yeah.
And that prodigality. Think how many animals get their nourishment from it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about Beatrix Potter being into mushrooms, which is just funny. It's about as lowly a life form as you could hope for without a microscope.
But if you get on the low level and you look at it in detail, you see how intricate and frilly and amazing that they are.
Yeah.
It is incredible. Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen, like these recent documentaries about fungus and what they mean to the forest and the ways that they serve as the neural pathways between trees. Have you ever seen this stuff?
No. That sounds really cool.
It's really interesting that trees can exchange nutrients with one another, even other species of trees, thanks to these basically neural networks that are the fungus.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I sat down with one of my kids to watch one of these documentaries. It was so interesting. Then they went off on psychedelic drugs and how how wonderful those were. So I didn't quite know what to do with that. But these are the risks you take. When you watch the documentary.
Education. Yes. That's great.
Well, there's this great passage in the China shop essay. You've gone from talking about Beatrix Potter noticing to your own habit of noticing. And I love the way you put it. I'm older now, but still a girl child sometimes when it comes to looking, stooping, hardly breathing as I stop to notice small splendors that cross my path. It does not come as easily as it once did. Opening a door and coming in from a world overheated by contention and a mind fevered with worst-case scenarios is often an act of the will. You have more to say about that?
Yeah. So with Beatrix Potter, I think one of the amazing things to me, because I've only recently learned more about her life and her other interests, and I love that she spent, I think, the latter part of her life purchasing farms and land around the Lake Country or the Lake District, and then planning to turn it over to the National Trust.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's amazing what she did.
When did she? Well, what were her dates? When did she die? Do you know?
I'm not sure.
Was it still did she live into the 20th century?
I think so. So Peter Rabbit was born 1893.
Oh. Okay.
And so yes,
I thought she was a little farther back.
Definitely did live into the 20th century.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No problem. I'm not that great with dates.
Of course, I didn't set myself up as an expert on Beatrix Potter either, like you did. So. Just kidding.
Yes, I know. I was asking for it. But I was going to say about the contrast. So one of the things that's amazing to me is that when I look back on encountering Beatrix Potter, I didn't know any of her interest in mycology or even that she had made a practice of noticing things in her life, but that came through her work to me. And it's a simple story. All of them are pretty simple stories. But it was the depth of her noticing that came through without any didacticism or, or any other sort of hints. Like, it just came through her art. And when I think about that, I think about the unseen things that writers and artists convey through their work, that are just part of the lives that they live. And so you rub off on the things that you create. And there are some things, I think, that are conveyed through that, even without you meaning to or intentionally putting it in. But no, as I've gotten older, I wonder sometimes if the trade-off of learning to notice things is that you kind of can apply that skill to other areas of your life. So if you have a sick child and an active imagination, then, you can go lots of fun places in your mind as to where you all are going to be at 3:00 a.m. and whether you need to go to the emergency room or that kind of thing. And I think, so I don't know if those are two sides of the same coin, but I know that definitely growing older has put me, of course, more in touch with the harsher realities of life. And so, it is a discipline, I think, to notice the right things and to dwell on the right things and to choose to draw from those. And I know that a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists have a lot to say about building trenches with your thoughts. And if you travel the same track for a long time, you just it's easier to slip into that same groove. And it takes a lot more effort to build new tracks and healthier ones. And so that is something that I'm constantly learning, I think.
Yeah. Would you say that your habits as a writer are, do they deepen those better tracks in your life? Or is it, I'm at my desk and I'm trying to, I've got these writerly habits, but then the rest of my life I'm worried about, what do you call it? The supply chain.
I think I can tell when I've worked myself into a rut writing wise, because I notice that my thoughts just start spiraling and I'm coming back around to the same thing, but in a more dour way each time. And so usually the thing that helps me to break out of that is to be out in community. And that's hard for me to say as an introvert, because I don't think I willingly put myself in the way of a lot of conversations, but there are meetings that are scheduled and people that I do talk to regularly. And when I've been doing that for a while, I'll sometimes show up at my desk and feel healthier and feel like I have more of a will to pursue certain writing projects or things like that. So Don't you have some good ruts though? I mean, ruts can be good, right? So I try to keep those intact and then try to build bridges out of the other ones. Yeah.
Hopefully going out and seeing people doesn't bust up all your good ruts too.
No. So the good conversations are the ones that really fortify those, I think.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I know we've been talking about your China shop essay, but another one of your essays that really caught my imagination was the one about, so you spent sort of your junior high years, it looks like, in Korea.
6th to 11th grade. Most of high school too.
Yeah. Wow. And so what is that? Oh, The Inheritance of Stories is the name of the essay that I'm talking about, where you revisit mentally Korea. I guess it was Seoul, Korea was where you were?
Yes. I'm trying to think if the last place where we lived would still be classified as Seoul. I think we ended up north of Seoul, but pretty much Seoul.
Big city. Seoul is like bigger than New York City, right?
I think so. It felt that way.
Okay. Yeah. And so sounds like maybe that wasn't, forgive me if I'm putting words in your mouth or getting it wrong. So maybe that wasn't the happiest time of your life. Like unlike for most of us, when 13, 14-year-old is just a uninterrupted bliss. But as you revisited, and we're just talking about mentally revisiting, right? You didn't actually go back to Korea, or did you?
No, I haven't been back since third year of college.
Okay. So as an adult, you knew a little bit more what to do with those stories. And I just want to talk about that because I think it's so interesting and so relevant to the way we think about our own lives. And as we try to turn as we try to make sense of our lives as stories.
Mm-hmm.
I know, like when I teach, I've taught college creative writing a lot of, many semesters, and I teach adults creative writing, and adults feel like they've had more life and they're ready to tell some of these stories, but the things they told have already happened to the 18-year-olds in creative writing class. They just don't know what to do with them yet.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not even, when I think about adults have more life under their belt, they're not necessarily writing about what's happened to them in the last 10 years. They're still writing about their childhood, but having more life under their belt, they know what to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
So that seems to be what happened to you with regard to your years in Korea.
Yeah. And I can sympathize with your students, because I think when I was in college talking to a mentor, she was asking me if I would ever write anything like a memoir. And I think I said something like, I don't know. I don't feel that I've lived enough life yet, or I haven't had enough suffering in my life yet. And she nodded, and I think she seemed to understand that. But at the same time, I think when I was about 11 or 12, I was thinking about how maybe I was going through something hard and feeling how hard it was. And I had this idea that when I grew up, I might turn around and look at the things that I was going through at that age and think, oh, that was nothing, compared to what I'm going through now. But at that time, I remember making a promise to myself that if I ever grew up and I looked back, that I would never belittle my 11 or 12-year-old self for feeling the way that I felt, because, and I think the way that I put it to myself was in terms of percentages. I said, it may be that I encounter something really hard and have to endure through something later on. But what I'm going through right now to my 11-year-old self is 100% is taking up 100% of my capacity for fear and grief. And that's as real as it can get. That's not going to be something that I can't relate to when I'm older. And so, of course, the irony now is that, over 2 decades later, I turn around and I'm like, oh, those weren't small things. Those were things that it was absolutely valid to be afraid or sad about. So
it would be a poverty as an adult not to be able to see that your child self really was feeling what, we belittle children's feelings, or even, or talk about puppy love, and yet, as you said, if it's filling your whole frame, it's filling your whole frame. If that's all you've got is that frame.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you put a finger on what or how, or what was the process by which you could look back on your youth and make sense of it? I mean, can you even put language to what that process was like?
A little bit. I think the trajectory of the essay is, I think the way that I went about writing the essay was unbeknownst to me. And I think I talk about maybe like a coffee table book.
Yeah, it seemed like it was a coffee table book.
I think, and this kind of underscores, I think, the kinds of things that we need community for, because I'm learning that I need others to teach me by example to see beauty the way they see it. And so it was maybe having just having that coffee table book for a few weeks and looking at it through the eyes of somebody else who was saying, look at what is beautiful about the landscape of Korea. And I don't even remember reading the text, but just the fact that it was portrayed the way that it was, I think made me a little bit more willing to revisit the things that I remembered firsthand.
Yeah.
But also I was probably reading the accounts of people who were talking about things from their childhoods that maybe weren't the easiest, but they were able to kind of view them with grace. I mean, I think that's what I learned from other writers and what I learned from being in community with other people. And I think that's what I love about it. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with telling a childhood memory when you're 20 and when you're 30, when you're 40 and you're 50, and you're probably going to get a different story or a different angle every time. And that's kind of like I don't know, maybe an analogy could be you use like a Leica camera, the kind with the light bulbs that exploded, and then you use a film camera and then a digital camera to photograph the same scene. And there's still truth in that image, the way that you're telling it, the elements are maybe the same, but what you're taught to see and the way that you're framing it is going to be different.
Yeah.
But I think what I love learning from other people is how I've been noticing, especially with my parents, like the older they get, the things that they talk about as the distance increases, I feel like they're able to view it with more grace. So their speech is seasoned with it, and they don't speak of things that hurt them with as bitter of an edge as they used to, I think, or could.
Yeah.
And I want to learn from that. Like I think that teaches me something about eternity and about how Paul can call things light momentary afflictions compared to the weight of glory, and having that experience of being able to experience a distance from past memories so that the hurt fades a bit and I can see and really feel how it would be possible for God to work all things for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purpose.
Yeah.
Having that experience gives me hope for, what things are going to look like that are going on in my life now, that they may look like I'm botching the grammar of this sentence, but how those things may look in the future or from eternity.
Yeah.
And I love
so
that.
Good.
Yeah. I love that perspective of grace.
One thing that I'm finding as I get older is stories of my youth that I told for laughs when I was, in my 20s or my 30s. As I get older, I still see the same stories as funny, but I see them as more than funny sometimes. Like, matter of fact, one of the first things I wrote for the Rabbit Room was a story about the time when I was in second grade, and I wrote a little get well card for a friend who's been in the hospital, and drew a picture, wrote a little poem, and the mother of the kid was so thrilled with it that she gave me a tube of vampire blood.
Oh.
Like, it was the first time I'd ever gotten paid for writing.
Okay.
And they had a convenience store, and she kind of looked around and said, it's October. I'm sure this kid would like some vampire blood.
Oh my word.
That's a funny story, right?
That is funny, yeah.
But I kind of felt like this story might mean something, but all I can get is it's funny. And then so as I said, that was like, I don't know, 2008 that I wrote that story for the Rabbit Room, and kind of left it just at, I think the story might mean something, but it's funny. And then, just played it for laughs. And then in the meantime, I had this, just brutal bout with writer's block. And Andrew Peterson and I were talking about writer's block. And he said, it's writing is like, and he was quoting somebody else. You open a vein and you bleed on the page. Writing isn't hard. You just open a vein and you bleed. And then I was like, aha, now I know what the vampire blood story was about.
Oh,
it was this woman saying, "Here, kid, you're going to need this." Still kind of funny, but it just felt like it's really. I think sometimes we think you write something when you write something and it's written.
Yeah.
And I'm finding that a lot of stories I wrote when I was younger didn't stay written.
Yeah.
And now that I'm older, I'm seeing more in those stories than I did before. So it's almost like my capacity for seeing is greater.
Yeah, I love that. I also love that your stories are initially told for laughs, because I feel like maybe it's my melancholy personality, but I feel like my stories are initially just tragic. And then I have to have the distance of about a decade to be like, oh, well, here are the lighter parts, and here are the things to appreciate, that exist to appreciate. Yeah, that you can appreciate. But actually, that happened to this essay too, because I first wrote an inheritance of stories back in 2018, I think, and then I revised it earlier this year or last year, or recently, because I had always felt that it was incomplete. But when I read it through again, a different memory came back, and I ended up changing the ending to that. Yeah.
I think I only read the more recent version, so I might have to go back and
that's good.
see what you did before. Well, great. Well, we're kind of coming to the end of our allotted time, but I've got to ask you, who are the writers who make you want to write?
Sure.
You can say Beatrix Potter if you want to.
She makes me want to paint in an amateur way.
Do you also paint, Amy?
I do not. I've just started doing a nature study watercolor course with my girls, but I don't really outside of that. So I'm learning.
Yeah.
But yeah. Writers who make me want to write. I think I've mentioned Anthony Doerr. I would say Linear
a lot lately, by the way, in these
Has he really?
episodes. I can't remember who, but I think you're the third person in the last 3 months probably who's mentioned.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Linear Ivester, who to me kind of embodies like the care and the gumption of a modern day Lucy Maud Montgomery. I love her for that. Leslie Bustard, I think for the way that she looks for beauty, and it's a faithful practice and it's a constant one. And I think that's something that I really need to learn from. Malcolm Guite, Alan Jacobs, anybody who can take academic writing or an academic background or a body of research and then put it into really engaging writing. I love that. Whenever I come across that, and that might still be because I'm detoxing a little bit from academic writing, I guess. And my girls, I think they're 8 and 11, but when they finish breakfast and run upstairs because they just had an idea for a short story, or when they come in from the garden looking for a piece of notebook paper because there's a poem that they saw and they're convinced it has to be written, I think that tends to remind me that there is an exhilaration at the heart of writing, and it doesn't have to be this, drudgery, exercise in drudgery that I sometimes set myself up for. They inspire me to write.
That's great. Well, Amy Beckley, thank you so much for being here. I hope you keep on putting these beautiful essays into the world.
Well, thank you so much. This was such a pleasure for me.
The Habit Podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. To check out more of our podcasts, visit rabbitroom.com/podcast. Our work at The Rabbit Room would be impossible without the generous support of our membership. If you'd like to learn more about membership at The Rabbit Room, visit rabbitroom.com/member. And thanks for listening.
The Habit Membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.